On this week's Carrier App, we speak with Angela Giancarlo, who's a partner in the technology, media, and telecom practice at Meyer Brown and a former chief of staff for FCC Commissioner Robert McDowell, to get her views on the current 600 megahertz incentive auction process and how the auction is set to address short-term spectrum needs. Well, thanks for joining us this week. My name is Dan Meyer. I'm editor-in-chief here at RCR Wireless News. And joining us this week on Carrier App is Angela Giancarlo, who's the a partner in the technology, media, and telecommunications practice at Meyer Brown, to talk a bit about the ongoing spectrum auction and the importance of spectrum. So, Angela, thanks for joining us this week. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Dan.
Great. Well, maybe start off with a little overview, if you can, of Meyer Brown, to kind of give, maybe those who don't know much about the firm, what you guys do and how you participate in the telecom space.
Sure. Well, Meyer Brown is a global firm. We have offices all over the world, including in China and Europe, South America, for example. Mm-hmm. And I am here, and there are a couple of others of us as part of the TMT group, as you say. We handle policy matters as well as transactional matters involving technology companies, media companies, and telecommunications companies.
Very good. Okay. Well, obviously, we're in the midst of what is a big spectrum auction. I'm sure in the DC area it's a talk. I know for us, we've been covering quite a bit here. But I guess, that's going to be, the topic of conversation for us today. But I guess, looking at the overall picture of the demand and the need for spectrum, obviously the telecom market and the wireless space specifically is a growing market. It seems like there's never enough spectrum. There's always this spectrum crunch going on. I know there, policy-wise, the current administration has really put out a pretty big emphasis on getting more spectrum out into the market. I guess, what's your general view of where we are in terms of the current spectrum market, and I guess how the ongoing or the current spectrum auction could be a good way to alleviate at least some of that need out there?
Well, the good news is, in the past couple of years, we've had a number of auctions after not having any for a relatively long period of time. Of course, the FCC has been auctioning spectrum since 1994.
Yep.
So we're in our, we've hit our 20-year anniversary and then some at this point. And of course, the growth and the demand is seemingly insatiable. Mm-hmm. In my house, my husband, my son, and I each have not just a mobile phone, but we have tablets. My son also has a Kindle. So the penetration rate in our country is more than 100% because of situations like ours. Furthermore, we are on the cusp of what people are calling 5G, also the Internet of Things, which means that many additional aspects of our lives are going to be equipped with spectrum devices that operate on spectrum. Yeah. We've heard about connected cars. We've heard about drones becoming more popular. We've heard about appliances in our houses, smart appliances, smart homes for that matter. Your light bulb is out, your light bulb is about to go out, your refrigerator is about to break down. So our lives are going to be enhanced by this, and at the end of the day, these products and services require spectrum. So while we have had a number of auctions in the immediate preceding years, the upcoming 600 megahertz auction of the spectrum that belongs to broadcasting is very promising. However, we're already looking ahead and need to continuously think about that pipeline and where is the next batch going to come from, because the supply really is not keeping up with the demand at this point. It's a constant effort.
Yeah, that's a good point too, because you're right. There was that gap. I think the last auction, rounds that we had was back the 700 megahertz auction back in I think
Right.
2008, and then the
Yes.
next one after that was the AWS 4 auction,
Yes.
basically, and that was a couple of years ago, and that was not a lot of spectrum. And then we had obviously AWS 3 last year, which
Yes.
freed up quite a bit, but there was that gap there, and it seems like what we've had over the past couple of years has really only been, it's only really targeting kind of what's happened over the past few years in terms of demand. We're almost just kind of catching up to where we are today. And obviously, like you said, with 5G and IoT coming up over the next 3 to 4 years, getting out ahead of that could be quite the challenge. I mean, obviously, like you said, the 600 megahertz, which is going to be happening here pretty quick, seems like a good step in the right direction. But we do need to have that next one hopefully planned out coming up. And I guess as you look at where are we going to get that? I guess the next, where do you see as being the next avenue for getting more spectrum out there?
Well, I think the good news here is that Congress has recognized the shortage or the demand or both. And the reason why we're here today and the reason why we've had this proliferation of auctions after a period without any is because of the Spectrum Act, which passed in early 2012. And we call it the Spectrum Act. Of course, it was part of a much larger budgeting maneuver. So I believe that legislation resulted from something of a perfect storm. There's quite a deficit belonging to our country. Plus, there's this heavy demand for spectrum, and Congress took steps to free up additional slices to be auctioned. So because members of Congress and other policymakers are sensitive to this issue and are educated as to what spectrum is and what it can do to enhance our lives and the benefits for consumers, the good news is that it's becoming something of a routine for them. I would not call it a Herculean effort per se to educate policymakers as to the benefits and to take a hard look at bands that could be freed up in the future. And that, of course, is going on, whether it's in Congress to look at new bands or whether it is the debate right now about 5.9 gigahertz and trying to share some of the spectrum that was allocated for automobiles back in 1999. Folks are focused in on the value that spectrum brings for consumers and sort of the double benefit of the impact positively on our economy.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, and additionally too, I guess there is kind of this new way of looking at spectrum, like you were saying, because obviously AWS 3, that spectrum was kind of a shared. It's basically a shared type of situation.
Yes.
A lot of spectrum, the DoD on that as well, and so that kind of shows that there can be a new way of doing it. And then obviously with the current auction going on, that is kind of a repurposing of broadcast spectrum. And it does seem like from a lot of people I've talked to, the government needs to have these kind of different ways of looking at, freeing up spectrum, because again, there's no free, clear bands of spectrum out there anymore, like there was back in the 90s where, we were able to find some 1.9 spectrum and say, hey, here's some great spectrum we can use. It seems like going forward, it's going to be, you have to be much more creative in terms of finding spectrum. And it does seem like the government is a little more open and finding ways to really do that too.
That's right. And it's taken a long time, and it has been a lot of important work has been done by many advocates to come to the place where we are. One thing I would respectfully challenge, though, is the difference between sharing and having cleared spectrum. The broadcast spectrum will be cleared. So there is a way to clear spectrum. The concept of sharing is pretty new in our vernacular, and that doesn't mean that it is undesirable per se, but ultimately having cleared spectrum or a process for fully clearing spectrum is, I think, better in the long run than having to share.
Yeah, that's a good point. You're right. Obviously, having clear spectrum is definitely a way to go. And it does seem like, too, maybe if we talked a bit about the ongoing process. I mean, recently the FCC kind of released the fact that they were able to free up 126 megahertz of spectrum, and they were very proud of the fact that most of that was fairly unimpaired spectrum, so
Yes.
very free spectrum. I guess how important was that number? Obviously, it was the max they were looking to get, which seemed was a very positive for the FCC. But the fact that there was so much of it that was unimpaired, it seems like that really is setting up, once we get to the forward auction process, to have a it should be a fairly lucrative, obviously for the government, spectrum process. And again, going forward, having that free spectrum should be good for all involved.
Well, stepping back, I have to say that my former colleagues over at the FCC, I really have to hand it to them. I was still at the agency when the very first rulemaking came down to start the process that leads up to the present auction. And it is, of course, first in the world, never been done before. And everything, regardless of whether we have policy disagreements or not, no one can argue with the quality of the work that's been done. And every piece of paper just evinces very, very deep thinking and planning, very granular planning. So my hat's off to them. So look, as far as the clearance target goes, that's a starting point. And you're right, that's a very good starting point. That is the place where the commission wanted to start from. And that's where, given the demand, the carriers want to be able to say, wow, that's a good place to start. It's very unlikely, however, that at the end of the day, we'll end up clearing that much spectrum.
Sure.
And it's difficult, perhaps, and a little bit counterintuitive to think about, but how we get to the final, what I would call the final band plan, or a more accurate band plan maybe, is, the broadcasters are going to be bidding against themselves. So the number is very likely to go down. It's a question of how far down it goes. And of course, the wireless providers are hoping that they end up with a good pickings, so to speak, instead of slim pickings. But so far, so good.
Yeah, man, I guess maybe touch a bit on that, the process involved, because again, this is an extremely complicated I mean, what the FCC has done over the past several years, putting this all together, I remember leading into it, there were so many questions about whether it was even feasible, and there's so many moving parts involved, and even the broadcaster side, they were a bit hesitant, and a lot of posturing going on. It just seemed like it was such a huge task going on at the same time where the FCC is just trying to do its normal day-to-day operations. And to have this involved just seemed like, so much happening at one time. I guess looking back at that process, I mean, like you said, it is pretty amazing what they've been able to do. I mean, have they set up the process, do you think, fairly well to this point, that going forward that we should be, that it should be fairly smooth, do you think, for the rest of the auction? Or do you see any sort of hurdles that might still crop up? What's your view of how we are today?
Well, it's a little bit hard to say, but reflecting back a little bit, I think that there were two significant factors that led broadcasters to come to the table, so to speak. First, last year's AWS auction, by all accounts, was phenomenal, right? I mean, just many, many billions, multiples of billions of dollars, 45 billion. And if you have an asset is worth that much money, it's going to give you, a little maybe dollar sign over your head. So I think that was significant. And then, the other piece would be when the FCC actually released numbers assessing the value of the stations, or the potential value, or what I would call the starting bid for the stations. Now, those numbers were pretty significant, especially for broadcasters located in large urban areas, which of course is where spectrum is most constrained. So I think that that the FCC folks had some good luck especially with the auction, which probably wasn't so difficult to predict, but I found it astronomical, because especially given that that spectrum is shared spectrum, to have raised $44 billion. Those kinds of numbers we typically have seen, and not even that high, obviously, but for cleared spectrum.
Yeah.
So I think that there was a little bit of good luck there. As far as looking ahead, at this point, it's really on the broadcasters.
Okay.
How much lower are they going to be willing to go? It's hard to say. Those are individual business decisions. Those are decisions that are made in boardrooms. Ironically, paradoxically maybe, the stations that are valued the highest are the ones typically where the spectrum is needed the most.
Yeah.
Now, but those are also profitable, presumably profitable stations. So I would imagine if I was in that broadcasting business that would be something very challenging to wrestle with.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there really was no downside to signing up for the auction, if especially given the choices that the FCC provided, off-air, share. They have a couple of different options. They're going into it knowing what their business parameters are, and I guess we'll see. I know from what I understand, it's predicted not to take, a whole heck of a long time, maybe a few weeks. And I believe Chairman Wheeler has already said that they expect the forward auction to start sometime in June.
Yeah, that's been kind of the talk. It seems like the next couple of weeks here we'll get rid of that right there. Yeah.
So with every passing day, I think we're getting more and more certainty, and the broadcasters begin on May.
Yeah,
it's already
May.
Right? Yeah, beginning at the end of this month, and we'll know more after that.
Yeah. And I always hate to kind of assume that money has a huge impact in this, but obviously, like you said, I mean, that AWS3 auction really seemed to have come at a great time, and definitely seemed to woke up the broadcasters to the potential to what they were sitting on. And I mean, again, I hate to think that they were only motivated by money, but when that much money was bid, double what we saw in the 700 megahertz auction. Again, the broadcasters, I'm sure it did seem like it definitely perked up their ears a bit.
Well, I mean, especially if it's a corporate entity, I mean, they have a fiduciary duty to their shareholders to make, good business decisions, and so money has a lot to do with it. I suppose even if you don't have shareholders, everybody has somebody that they report to, and at least you would have to investigate the possibility of signing up, right? If you had not, that would not be consistent with the duty of a broadcast station with investors.
Yeah.
So here we are, and a lot of takers so far, right?
Yeah.
So we can only hope that enough hang on to get the spectrum out to the wireless providers to start augmenting their services.
Yeah. I guess maybe the final question, maybe looking forward a bit. Obviously, we've seen the list of participants who are registered, at least on the forward auction side of things. It does seem like that the telecom space has really come to the fore and said, hey, we're interested in this. I guess what's your view on how they've come up and how the FCC has set up the forward auction process? Obviously, there's the set-aside spectrum, which was a very controversial move to some. It does seem like, that process will be interesting to watch how that plays out. But do you think, I guess, looking ahead, are we set up in a good spot to really kind of get spectrum into the right hands of companies? And the FCC, does it seem like they've done a pretty good job in kind of making sure that, the spectrum that will become available will be put to use in a fairly, a rapid time frame? And obviously we have the 39-month clearing period, but a good time frame.
I think time will tell.
Okay.
Honestly, I think that it's difficult with every condition that's placed in an auction, it introduces risk. This set-aside concept is new. Mm-hmm. It's very confusing, even for those of us that have been doing this for decades. It's I think that time will tell. I'm a less is more type. I like to really just get down to the market and see how it works. But look, if nothing else, we can say that the rules were adopted in good faith and with good expectations, and we'll see.
Yeah. And again, like you said, I mean, the FCC has done a tremendous job in laying this out. Again, extremely complex. I mean, looking through all the paperwork and the documents and the filings on this. I mean, yes, obviously for myself, it's a lot going on.
It's a lot, and it's every American is going to be affected by this, whether they realize it or not. Yeah. As of today, I would doubt that, our parents or our grandparents really have any idea about their local broadcaster and this potential auction, whether or not they're going to be staying in business or not. But that news is going to start to come out, and everyone will be affected by it. And that's actually a good segue to talk about the post-auction process.
Sure.
Where, when the forward auction concludes, there's still going to be a lot to do in order to move the broadcasters. And that's been a source of debate at the agency. There haven't been any changes to the original 39-month deadline, and broadcasters are concerned about that. I think that it's a question of no one really knows how long this is going to take and what type of variables could come up to delay or even expedite, for that matter, the process. But I'm quite certain that that's when consumers are going to start to become aware of, the changes to their television dial, possibly, etc. So even when the forward auction closes and even after the spectrum is granted, it will be very important to have that process run smoothly and efficiently so that ultimately the consumer isn't disrupted. And so that the carriers that have participated in the auction, potential providers, all current incumbent providers, can capitalize on their investment. Presumably they're going to spend billions of dollars, and they'd like to be able to put the spectrum to work.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it seems like the FCC probably needs to have a bit, or maybe, I mean, obviously you have to have some flexibility in the process, because again, that 39-month window, the broadcasters have been, like you said, they've been a little hesitant about that timing, and the carriers have been very adamant about that timing. But you're right, it is an unknown. We don't know what's going to be part of it. So
yeah, I mean, there's a little bit. I've sensed a little bit of a disagreement on part of the carriers. But look, at the end of the day, I think everyone wants to make sure it happens as quickly as possible, and in organized a fashion as possible, which benefits everybody.
Yeah. And is your general view that it will be a fairly smooth process, do you think? Or do you expect that there will be some hiccups along the way, I'm guessing?
There are always hiccups. I mean, when I was at the agency, we were dealing with hiccups that had happened 5 years before I arrived. So there are always hiccups. We can't say that it's going to be smooth. I would never take that bet. But we hope that they're not, that they're hiccups as opposed to, paralysis or something more serious.
Yeah. And it might be a whole different administration in place at that point too. So it'll be their problem. What do we care?
Well, it will be. I mean, it will be a new administration, and hopefully I have no doubt that they'll be prepared to step in and, pick up where things leave off.
Yeah, it should be interesting. Well, again, Angela, definitely appreciate the insight today. Obviously, it's a very exciting time we're in. For those of us who enjoy spectrum auctions, and I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to the auction. Right. It's a very exciting time. Yeah, it's a very exciting time. I'm sure in DC, it's insane there as well. So we definitely appreciate the great insight. And obviously, it's always great to kind of get some insider information and kind of the views on what's happening in this process. We definitely appreciate that. Thanks so much.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks so much, Dan.
Great. Thanks so much again. Okay. And thanks everyone for watching this week's show, and make sure to check us out again next week.